Floating elements in web design can be applied to backgrounds and be animated and provide additional context to fill out a page that might otherwise look plain and ordinary. In this video, I'm going to show you some really cool examples of how floating elements can be utilized and how to start adding them to your own websites. Let's begin.
First, let me give you some background. I was browsing the web when I came across a few websites that had these elements that were both in the foreground and background with some animation and made a lot of pages come to life. So, I wanted to learn more about these. What are they and why are people using them in web design? Adding small visual elements to a landing page or even a hero section seems more and more common in web design these days. And this is what I'll do in this video. What are these floating elements? Why do people use them and how can I add them into my own website so that it looks better than it currently does. These floating elements can sometimes be large and loud, and other times they can be quiet and subtle. Let's take a look at this example from Car and Vehicles. I like this because it's a website about travel, and at the very top right we have a bird which looks like he's singing. Then, if you look closely above the input, there are a couple of trees or shrubs with a flower that just add a little bit more life to the page. Take notice how all the design elements actually adhere to the context of this website. As I scroll through the page, there are other elements that are floating about, such as these icons about travel, and even these squiggly lines which separate out different sections while also floating about on the page. The floating objects also don't need to be that animated or complex in order for it to make a website or a page look more visually appealing. Like here on this Vev example, this simple circle just adds a little bit more contrast to the text which would otherwise make this whole page feel white and bland. And a simple floating shape behind an image can do the same thing, like in the examples below. Another example which takes this one step further is the website Lottie files. Here we still have some simple shapes like stars or cubes, but they're also moving. They're wiggling up and down and rotating just very slowly. For this website, I think it makes sense, since it's a website about designing and animating objects, and these objects which are simple shapes make it feel like it's very easy to get started. Though once you get started, it's hard to stop. I'm now always on the lookout on what kind of things I can add to the background of the page just to make it look a little bit better. I do want to mention not to get confused with SVG backgrounds versus floating elements. While they look similar, SVG backgrounds actually still have animated movement in the background, but they're made for an entire section. They can definitely look good. So let me explain why they're different. The floating objects on a page have to be relevant to the page itself, like this example from Cosmic. They have this space theme happening, and you can see the floating elements are little moons or planets that are orbiting around a central point on the website. This encourages people to stare at the middle of the screen where the call to action get started is. Now, let me show you this example here from Halo Lab. The main floating element is this 3D icon just close to the hero text. Its purpose is to draw your eyes to that hero text. And due to the fact that it's animating in and out different icons, you'll continue to stare at this section, which increases the likelihood that you'll actually read what's on the page and click through to the call to action. I also definitely recommend you check out this website because it's got some brilliant use of animation on different sections. Not all floating elements are made equal. Sometimes they can be boring and yet still add a little bit of dynamic to a page. Like this one from Jive. By itself, it's just a website showing two screenshots of an iPhone that's meant to be kind of like a business card. But with the floating elements, this page is no longer as white and bland as it otherwise would. Your eyes are drawn towards the text and the images below. This is because the actual direction of the squigglies are kind of pointed towards the text and the images, while also making sure that there's not too much white space on the page. And this is good use of floating elements. On the extreme example, Kanak Naturals is a website about packaging. Their use of floating elements is done in 3D with animation and movement. Even as you scroll down, the packaging actually carries through to each one of the sections, so you can see the element that you're actually purchasing directly from them. While this is probably the highest level of floating elements in use, this shouldn't scare you away from using the basic versions to supplement a background or website section with just a couple of swigglies or shapes. Let me finish up the example here with this Pennsylvania website about growing your products. As you scroll through, these floating elements actually move directly to the next section, which is a brilliant use of floating elements in execution. Now it's time for some practical examples. I'm going to show you how to add your own floating elements into a website and how to also make them animated. I'll start here on Wix Studio. It's a no-code platform that I'm often building sites on. I'll start off with a pre-made template. I'll log in and select Create Site from the top right and just select from the templates. On this page, if I scroll down a little bit, I have this nice design here for a business consulting agency, which I'm going to select to edit. Let me spend a few seconds customizing it, getting it ready for adding some floating elements. Now, I'll show you a few examples of floating elements you can use for your own designs. The first example is the inflatable abstract objects over here, which you can use and have them float around. But another trick I found is to just head over to Figma and simply use the community section to search for what you're looking for. In this case, I'm going to just search up 3D shapes, and they're always good for use as floating objects. I found this really simple one called 3D shapes for your designs, which you can add practically anywhere. And they're basic cubes as well as cylinders, and I decided to use the green ones since they fit in line with the style of the site. I can then select to export them as a PNG and a transparent background. And heading back to my site, I can select to add a quick element as an image. I'll change this image. I'll upload the one that I just downloaded as a PNG. And I'll resize this image and place it here on the right hand side so that it kind of fits on top of the layers I currently have. I'll also add one more in here on the left hand side, and I'll move it about until I find a position where it looks good. Now that I have a few floating elements, I want to also have them animated. So what I could do is I could select one of them, and on the right hand panel I can expand that out and head over to animations and effects. Here I'm going to add a looping animation, and for this I'm just going to do something simple like a breathe. This will just make it kind of bounce up and down indefinitely. For the sphere, I'm going to do something similar. I'll head to animations, select loop, and for this one, maybe I'll do pulse. The result is this animated page now with a couple of floating elements that are adding a little bit more life to this page. You can always expand on such designs, adding in movement when you scroll, or even just adding small little elements on top of large hero text as well. But this should be enough to give you an idea of how to make them yourself.